Hello, this is Jeff Neville for Selective Imagery. If you'd like to skip ahead and go past my introductory slideshow, it kind of shows you folks what I like to take pictures of. Jump ahead to about the 1 minute and 45-second mark, and that should get you close to where we start the real deal here with the video. Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Welcome to Selective Imagery. Welcome to Thanks for the Memories, Part 5. Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about a 1962 Ansco Autoset camera, which was actually made by Minolta and rebadged with the Ansco brand on it. It's the same as a Minolta Himatic. And here's a quick view of it right here. Okay, we'll talk about it in a second. First, I'm going to talk about Ansco real brief. That's a company you want to read about. Real interesting stories. Man, they went through a lot of BS, I'll tell you. They're not around anymore, obviously, but they were a photographic company based in Binghamton, New York. They produced photographic film, papers, and cameras from the mid-19th century up till the 1980s. Now, their predecessor, Anthony and Scoville, bought the Goodwin Camera and Film Company, and Hannibal Goodwin, he actually invented flexible photographic film, which should have made Anthony and Scoville the leader in the amateur photography business. Now, Goodwin had applied for the patent for this process in 1887. It was not granted until 1898, and Ansco bought the patent from him in 1900. In the meantime, George Eastman had copied the patented process. Not that he didn't have his own chemists, he did, but he patented the process, copied it, and he got a patent issued to him in 1889, a year before Ansco bought the patent from Goodwin. Getting confused yet? Now, this ruthless behavior by Kodak, Eastman, almost put Ansco out of business. I mean, they obviously filed a lawsuit for patent infringement, and it took a decade to resolve. And around 1905, I mean, they got $5 million. They won the case. They got $5 million. It kept them from going bankrupt. But Eastman Kodak, we all know, got away pretty darn cheap, considering how much money they've made on film. But I don't know why, but they obviously were not blocked from being able to continue to make film. And there you have it. Interesting story. Now, Ansco never designed or manufactured any cameras of their own. They were all rebadged versions of somebody else's camera that already existed, whether it be Agfa, Chinon, and this, obviously, this Minolta camera that we're going to talk about. Now, this is a fully automated 35mm manual focus coupled rangefinder camera, and it utilizes a selenium meter here, which in this day and age rarely ever works. I mean, this does have changes in sensitivity to light. It appears to work fine, which is a very unusual thing to have in a camera of this era. Now, when you look through the viewfinder on the right-hand side, you basically see a vertical bar. It's white in the middle, red at the top, red at the bottom. If that needle indicator falls in that white area, you're going to get a correctly exposed image. If it's in the red, don't bother taking the picture. The camera uses a 45mm f2.8 rocker lens. Shutter speeds are 1/30th of a second to 1/800th of a second. This is considered a fully automatic camera by nature. You set it, you adjust a ring on the front, you set it for auto mode. It sets the f-stop and the shutter speed. When you actually look at the ring, and we'll kind of zoom in on that in a little bit, you'll see f-stop numbers, but nowhere on this camera body do you see any shutter speeds. So you have an auto mode, you have a B mode for time exposures, and then you go into flash mode, where basically you're trying to adjust the proper guide number based on your focusing distance. And we'll get into that more a little bit later. If you try to override this camera, you take it out of the automatic mode, then what happens is the camera defaults to 1/30th of a second shutter speed. So you're basically going to have to use a light meter, because even though you have f-stop numbers on the side, it's not like you can adjust the f-stop to what you want and the shutter speed's going to change. The shutter speed's locked in at 1/30th, so you have to have your light meter. You know you're at 1/30th of a second. You know you're shooting, say, ASA 100 film or 400 film, and you're going to basically take your exposure reading with the light meter, and it'll tell you what f-stop to set the camera to. So it's just not desirable to go into a manual mode with it. Now, being a coupled rangefinder camera, what that means is you have a focusing spot in the middle when you look through the rangefinder. In this case, it's a pink triangle. And when you're not in focus, you have basically a double image. So as you adjust the black focus ring here, when those images come together and line up, then you're in focus. You have a visible frame line in the viewfinder, which has automatic parallax correction. So when you're focusing and you're looking through this, whatever is inside that frame line is going to be what's on your negative. Now, being that you never know what shutter speed you're at with this, I don't know how you'd use it for action shots of any kind, because you don't know what your shutter speed is. You don't know. You just don't know. Now, you can't make. We'll go over what's on the camera. Like I said, you got your selenium meter, your rangefinder. This is your shutter releases on the front. You got a PC socket for your flash. We'll go over, other than this one lever here in this location, you cock this for your self timer. You push your shutter release twice and the timer activates, and you got 10 seconds to jump in the picture and get your picture taken. The other inscriptions that are on this lens we'll talk about in a minute. So when I first looked at this camera without having a manual, I thought this was the shutter release. You're so used to it being up here near the film advance lever, but it's not. This is where you thread in your your remote cable release for firing the shutter. Screws into this. It's not actually a button. It's pretty much flush with the top plate, and you got your, like I said, your film advance lever, your window for what shot you're at, a cold shoe, and you have your rewind crank. Okay, for when you're done taking the shots. Look at the bottom, you have the button that you push to allow you to crank it back into the canister when you're done taking your pictures. You have the tripod socket, which is not centered to the camera, which isn't really unusual for cameras of this age. And Other than that, you have, you're on this side of the camera, you have a release latch that pops the back door open for loading your film. And that dial above is for, you lift the outer ring up and you rotate it to pick your ASA setting. And then obviously what you're looking through to frame your picture and take your picture. Now we get into one thing that's really cool on this camera, which I never expected, was if you're taking a picture, you got kids sitting on the beach, obviously the light behind them is really bright, or you're taking a picture of somebody under, and say away from a tree, but there's shrubs in the background that are really dark. That's going to want to screw up your exposure meter. So you basically get to where you want, you focus your subject, you got to make a note of where you were. Then you walk up to them and you push the shutter release part way down. You get right up to them so that you're taking a meter reading off of them. You hold this part way down. It's like an auto exposure lock, and then you back up to where you were. You make sure you're still in focus. Take the picture. And that's it. So that's really cool for a camera, that was made in, it came out in 1962 to basically have an auto exposure lock feature. Now what's on the lens itself, if I hold this up, you see a red arrow lined up with a white arrow. That's in auto mode. The camera is going to pick your f-stop and your shutter speed. If I move this ring on the lens, I can go to the letter B. That's for my time exposures. If I rotate it further, where you have that lightning bolt look, that's for setting for flash settings. It allows me to adjust the guide number of my flash to match up with my focusing distance. If I rotate this lens, I've got other markings on the camera. Closest to the camera body is my focus distance. Basically, I got a red dot there. Goes from 3 feet to infinity. I have f-stop numbers up here. But as I said before, you can't set the f-stop and then have it adjust the shutter speed because it's going to be locked in at a 30th of a second when you're not in automatic mode. On the other side here, if you have the ring set for shooting flash, then what you have is another red dot on this lens ring. And once you focus, it's going to line up with one of these indicator lines. And then you have to match your guide number to that line. Okay, as required. And your guide number is going to be determined depending on your film speed, your shutter speed, is a 30th of a second, and what the power of your flash is. So between your flash manual and everything else, you got to know what your guide number is and you got to set it. And then you can take the picture. And obviously it's not a hot shoe. It's not an active hot shoe. It's a cold shoe. So you're going to have the cable plugged in here for using the flash photography. And and that's about it. Now, a little history though, where I got this camera from is I didn't get this camera. This camera, a close friend of mine who shall remain nameless, donated or shipped me this camera as a gift, and he knows that I like cameras with history. So you're like, okay, so what's so historical about this camera? Well, on February 20th, 1962, John Glenn was in the Mercury capsule doing 3 orbits around the Earth, and the capsule was called Freedom 7. While he was zinging around the planet, he had one of these cameras with him that NASA had to retrofit it, so he had a pistol grip with a trigger to fire the shutter, and then he had to have a viewfinder aid because he couldn't put this up to his eye wearing a helmet. But they designed something so that he could take pictures using his camera. He took a picture of Florida when he flew over the Earth as one of the pictures. And what's interesting is it must have been some kind of a marketing thing with Ansco, is they were, if you bought this camera, you got 4 slides of 4 images that John Glenn took with this model camera when he was up in space. I found a guy selling those slides on eBay for, I don't know, it was like $40 to $45, which I thought was a bit much for 4 slides. If I could have got them for $20, I would have bought them for the historical reasons to tie in with this camera. But that's one of the things that makes this a really, really neat camera. I thank my friend, who he knows who he is. He comes on my channel. I appreciate it very much. This is going to be a neat camera to try out, and we'll see how it works. But it appears to be fully functioning. Self-timer works, shutter works, meter reacts to changes in light. I have a feeling it's in perfectly good working order. The focusing spot is bright enough where I can see it. And I really, really appreciate it. And that's it for this camera. We'll move on to the next one. Hi, I wanted to clarify some statements I made on the Ansco auto set camera when you're setting your guide numbers for flash. I stated that the guide number would depend on the film speed, the flash capabilities, and the shutter speed, which is actually the flash sync speed. And this reference to shutter speed may have confused folks, since on, flashes nowadays, the flash sync speed has nothing to do with affecting a guide number. It's simply, guide number is your f-stop value times distance. But that isn't completely true when it comes to these older cameras, because many of them did not use electronic flash, which basically could give you a full power output in thousandths of a second. If you're using, back in that era, flash guns that had bulbs in them, those bulbs are much more powerful output-wise than any of these typical electronic flashes, and the duration is much longer than an electronic flash. So that's why the shutter speed or flash sync matters. I saw an example. There's an example in Wikipedia talking about, okay, if you're using a GE SynchroPress number 11 bulb, the guide number at 1/25th of a second is 320. At a 50th of a second, it's 260. Okay, because the faster the sync speed, the less time that film is exposed to the power from that flash bulb. So, the faster the sync speed, the lower the guide number is going to be. So, and remember, when you were a kid, if you're in your 50s and you were a kid growing up and your folks had these old cameras and they put a flash bulb in their unit, took a picture of you, they were so powerful that, you'd be blinking your eyes, you'd be kind of like you didn't want to walk around for a minute. You saw all these blue dots in the sky, and it really messed with you, because those flash bulbs were extremely powerful. And they're always full strength, okay? They're not like a modern day ITTL flash unit, that throttles back the power, cuts the flash duration, or you can make adjustments so that you're shooting it at half power, quarter power for fill flash or whatever. You didn't have any fill anything. You got, boom, you got hit with the whole power of that flash cube. So that's why I mentioned the shutter speed, because for that era of camera, with that era of flash technologies, it was a factor. So I just wanted to clarify that, because most people would say I was talking out of my behind here, and I didn't need to mention shutter speed at all, but in effect I really did. So basically, in a nutshell, look at your flash manual, determine the guide number for the flash for the appropriate film speed that you're using. Take into account that you're shooting at a 1/30th of a second. You're going to find out what the guide number is. And when you're setting up a camera like this, after you focus, you're going to go and adjust the ring to set the guide number that you came up with to line up with the indicator line that matches the red dot on the focus ring. And that's what you're going to have to do. So I just wanted to clarify this so I don't get 100 emails telling me I don't know what I'm talking about, which may be true half the time, but this time I'm actually, not crazy. All right, we will continue to move on. Hello, back again to talk about the second camera in this video. And the second camera is very, very interesting. I mean, many of you, know a lot of what I have. I've done other Thanks for the Memories episodes on a lot of the other cameras that I have, not necessarily all of them. But I had the opportunity to buy a working 1930s era Friedrich Deckel Munchen plate camera, 6x9 plate camera made in Germany. And it was made in the 1930s. It's a folding bellows 6x9 plate camera made by Friedrich Deckel. And this is what it looks like. Okay, you say, wow, that ain't nothing. It's like a little box. It's not really that big. This is the back. Okay, then you have a ground plate in here that you focus on. And you have, tripod sockets for both horizontal and vertical orientation. Now, the problem with the tripod sockets that I found is that the thread depth isn't deep enough for today's screws that you have on a modern tripod. So the camera body is sitting up a little bit off the plate, which isn't good. So I made myself a little spacer, like waffle material that you'd use like if you're routing wood, and you put the wood on sheets of this stuff so it grips it and the wood doesn't move when you're routing. Well, I used some of that, and I cut it, put it on the bottom of the camera, then put it on the tripod, tighten it up, and this fills in the gap and works out really good. So along with this, and I'll talk about separately, is you could shoot with special paper with camera film holders, or you could get a 120 film back, which I have, but there's a catch with this particular film back. I don't know how many were made that fit this camera, or if there's others out there that would work better. This is the one that happened to come with the camera. And because this is a 6x9 camera, it doesn't take as many shots. Like 120 film, depending on what medium format camera you're using it in, you get a different number of exposures. So if I put 120 film in my Raleigh, which is a square format, my Raleigh Flex, which is a 6x6 centimeter format camera, I get 12 exposures on a 120 roll. This is a 6x9, which is good because it has an aspect ratio equivalent to like if you're a 3:2 aspect ratio, so it'd be like be very easy to make an 8x12 out of it, you know, or 16x24. So it gives me a different aspect ratio, which I like if I don't want to do square photos. But you can only take 8 photographs. And basically you would, when you're advancing the film, assuming you could see the film counter, what number you're on, which is going to be a separate discussion, you'd take your picture, you know, shot number 1, you would have to skip and then advance it to number 3. So you do 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15. You'd get 8 shots out of that roll. Now, what we'll do is we're gonna open it up from the front, and this is the front where you have this like little wheel here poking through. To press the button on the top, the front drops down and locks. There's the rail system. There's the lens back there. We're going to grab these 2 little prongs and squeeze them together and pull out the bellows from the camera. And it'll lock in place along the guide rail. And you can see, okay, you got an indicator here, distance indicator, and there's a notch. You pull that out and it locks. You're basically set for focusing on something that's at infinity. If you need to go closer, your subject is closer, then you need to push in this locking tab here and move the bellows for the shorter focusing distances. And, you know, you're going to be able to tell whether something's in focus when you're looking at the ground glass on the back. But this is how it looks from this side, from this side. Now, when you're framing your image, you have this wire frame that swings out. You can look through that to frame your image. You could look through this optical glass and see your image. It has a bubble level, but because this camera is so old, the fluid has long since evaporated from this, so it's not a working bubble level, which, you know, I don't really care about anyway. But so you can frame it with this. You can look through the optics, or you're looking at the ground glass. But the thing with the ground glass is it doesn't have any frame lines, you know, etched into the glass. So, you know, taking your chances in terms of if you want to be very precise about, you know, where your image sits. And we'll go in close on this. And at the top, you're going to see the shutter speeds. Okay. You got T, B, and then 1 second, all the way up to 2/50th of a second. And you can see the branding on it. See if I get close enough. You see the F decal dash München, which means Munich. It's a 105 millimeter lens, Xenar f4.5 with a Compur shutter. And you have the logo right here, FD, Friedrich Decker logo. Now that logo you're going to find on a lot of Voigtlander bellows plate cameras of the era, and a lot of cameras of that era will have his logo on it. Because He actually manufactured the Compur shutter, which was on just about every camera of the era. And we'll get into that in a little more detail in a few minutes. So you have your shutter speeds up top. You have your f-stops on the bottom. The f-stops go from f4.5 to f32. Swing this frame thing out here again. You have, this is your cocking lever for your shutter. This is your shutter release down here. You have an adjustment knob on the top, and you have this adjustment knob on the side. And that actually will tilt and shift your bellows like a tilt-shift lens. So that if you're doing architectural photographs, you could turn these knobs. You can see the dot down here. So as I move see how the dot's moving. So it has a marking, you know, so I can put it back in a neutral position. And then there's also a dot up here, and there's a very faint dot in the background for when I'm adjusting it on this axis. So you basically have a built-in tilt-shift lens. Now another way of framing is if you're doing a horizontal picture, is you have this mechanism up top to look through for framing. That locks in place. Now if you want to look at your image on the ground glass, we'll look at the back. There's a little release lever here. That pops open the back, and then you push these folds the other way. There you go. Okay? You could see through you can see you're looking at the ground glass. And I was able to clean the ground glass with some Dawn dishwashing detergent and get it fairly clean, and it's decent. It's really, really good. And like I said, if you're shooting things far away anyway, you're going to just pull the bellows out to infinity. It's going to be in focus. You're just going to, you know, cock the shutter and take the picture. You're going to determine your shutter speed and your f-stop with a handheld light meter, as usual. Okay, but if you we'll go through the process of what you would have to do to take a picture with this somewhat odd looking camera. First off, you're not going to use this handheld. You're going to put it on a tripod. So you're going to mount it on a tripod. You're going to adjust the f-stop wide open. So you're going to slide the lever on the bottom so it lines up with f4.5. And the reason you want to do that is because you're not seeing the actual image from the lens unless that shutter is open. And right now, you know, it's a leaf shutter, okay? So your aperture blades are your shutter. So it's wide open. You have to adjust your shutter speed to time mode. Okay, you got to adjust your shutter speed to time mode. Now you're going to have this on the tripod. You're going to frame everything. You know, you're going to frame your image. Okay. I'm just closing this because it's in my way, but normally that would be swung out, or I'd be looking down at the optical one. You're going to frame it. You're going to set your shutter in the time mode. You're going to push down the shutter release lever here. Okay. And the shutter's open. I don't know if you're going to see anything from the back, if it's well lit or not. Now the problem with a ground glass plate, unlike a Rolleiflex, you have a series of mirrors in there. When you're using the chest level viewfinder, you flip it up, you're looking down, you have a few mirrors in there. So your image that you're looking at and focusing on is what you see with the naked eye when you take your head away from the viewfinder. You know, you look at a ground glass image, you don't have any mirrors in here at all. The image is upside down. So the person's head is going to be at the bottom of the glass, and their feet are going to be at the top. And that's just the way it is. Now, they used to sell some viewfinder. I haven't found one. They have vintage viewfinder ground glass plate magnifiers. So you get a magnified image so that you can adjust your focus precisely. And I think there's one out there, there's some out there that will flip the image so that when you're looking through that magnifier, the image is in the proper orientation. But these old ground glass viewing magnifiers are very hard to find. You know, most families that, if this was like their great-grandfather's camera and he had one of those, they didn't know what it was for. It got tossed in the trash. They kept the camera. They threw away the ground glass viewing magnifier. So they're hard to find. They are out there, but they are hard to find, and they're not necessarily cheap. A lot of them were made out of brass. So at this point, we've framed the subject. We got the f-stop wide open at 4.5. We set the shutter for time exposure. We pushed it so that we could see the image in the back. And we're going to make sure everything's in focus. Now, once it's in focus, you know, we'll adjust for tilt shift if we need to. If we're okay, we'll just click the shutter again to close it. At this point, you know, we haven't taken a picture yet. Okay, we've viewed it, we focused it. Now we have to remove the plate glass back. So we fold those in. The back locks. There's a release lever here. There's a indentation at the top to stick your fingernail and lift the thing up. So I'm going to slide that lever out, and I should be able to pull out the plate. Now you can see right inside. Okay. Here's the plate glass. And if you ever bought one of these cameras and the glass is cracked, there are videos on YouTube where people show you how to make your own ground glass. You can manufacture it yourself. So now I got to put the film in. So I'm using this 120. I'm going to use this 120 film back. If I had the special photo paper, I got these photo paper containers. You slide this up, you would put your paper in here in a darkroom, of course. It would already be treated. You would then slide the cover back down. You would slide it through the grooves on the back, lock it in place. You would lift up this lip, you know, take it out if you want. And assuming you have your f-stop and your shutter speed set, you know, you're going to get it out of T mode. You're going to set it to whatever the shutter speed needs to be, whatever your f-stop needs to be, on the bottom lever. You're going to set it to whatever you need it to be, and you're going to cock the shutter. And with this plate pulled out, the film is exposed, and then you're going to take the picture. Then you're going to put this plate back in to cover it up, and you're going to remove it. So back in the old days, whether you were using what they called the wet film process and you were exposing on pieces of glass that had different chemicals put on them, along with the silver halide solution that would react to light, and you had glass plate holders versus a film plate holder, you know, you'd have to have a bunch of holders pre-made. If you were going to be shooting for a couple hours with a family or whatever out there, you would have to own a lot of these plates, whether they were glass or the film, and constantly, you know, doing your focusing on the ground glass, taking that back off, putting in the film holder or the plate glass holder, and take a picture, pull it out. If you didn't have to refocus, if you're just taking multiple pictures from the same distance, then yeah, you could just put in another plate. Take it, you know, if the lighting didn't change, you don't have to change anything on the front. You cock the shutter, take another picture. You know, so if you were set up and you had your camera set up, people were sitting in chairs or something, they're all sitting in the same spot, you know, your camera's all set up, you could do it quickly, but you'd have to buy a bunch of these holders. So now the other option, which is why I bought this camera, is because it has a 120 roll back. Now, I don't know if this is the original back that was made for this camera. I'm really not sure. It doesn't have a brand name on it. And the person had put a white sticker on there saying, you know, advanced to, you know, from frame 1 to 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, and 15 for your 8 exposures. And then you have your viewing window here with the red plastic. Doesn't do you any good. The 120 film, the numbering does not line up with this hole. This is my sticker that I put on to say I got 400 speed black and white in here right now, because I got a multiple cameras on my shelves with different times of film and different film speeds, and they don't all have, I mean, this camera obviously doesn't have anything on it where I can dial in what speed film I have in the camera, so I don't forget. So I'm going with my sticker method. And the problem I'm going to have with this, I wanted to do a live shoot. What I'm going to have to experiment with is I had to go online to find out, okay, how many times do I advance the film with the roller here to get it where I'm at, where I would take picture 1. And then how many times do I have to turn it? Because like now I'm skipping frame 2 and I got to go to frame 3. Well, how many times do I have to turn this to get where I would be on frame 3? All of that is a work in process. I have a guide that my friend showed me online. I'm going to try it based on this person's recommendations. If it doesn't work out, I'm just going to have to put in a roll of film, wreck a roll of film, and just watch it through the process and count myself how many times I have to wind this to get the roll where I want it to be, and make a bunch of notes so that when I'm loading this thing up, I know what I have to do to be able to fit my 8 shots on it. I mean, I'm going to get some shots on this, but I don't know whether I'm going to get 8. It depends on if those numbers I got are correct or not. I can't show you how to load the film in here, but basically this piece, you lift up on these tabs and this thing folds out, and there's a center part that pops right out because you have to put the film in, and the film basically is going to go across what's behind this plate. This plate right now is covering up the negative. The negative is on the other side of this plate. So that film gets loaded in, it goes across, it goes back in onto the take-up spool. And like I said, I had to go by this guy's guidelines and advance it so many times. And now I have the plate, you know, this is blocking that negative from being exposed. So I would then, using this back, I would then slide that onto the back of the camera. Okay. Slide that onto the back, flip my locking lever so it can't move out. Have my shutter speed, my f-stop correctly. Take a picture. Advance the film X number of turns. And you know what a complete turn is because it kind of has a detent when you're turning it. It kind of does like a click, and you know that's a full turn. And, you know, and then you advance it as needed, and then you know, if you're taking a second shot of the same thing or the same distance, if everything's at infinity and you got your shutter speed and your f-stop correct according to your light meter, you know, boom, take another picture, advance the film again. And then when you get through your, you know, your 8 shots, just wind the film the rest of the way. And that's it. But, you know, when you go to take that first picture, you got to lift up on this cover so that the negative is exposed. Take the picture, push it back down. Now, what I did was I put little paint marks on the side of this holder so that I don't have to pull it out all the way. I marked it so I know how far up I can be where I'm not blocking the negative. Take the picture, put it back down, wind to the next one, pull it up to those lines again, take the picture, advance the film. So this might seem really complicated, and maybe it is. But to me, the biggest pain in the neck is just getting a feel for this film back and how far I have to wind it to get the number of exposures that I want. And I wanted to actually shoot this out in the field, but the weather has been horrible. It's raining all week down here. So I'm going to take the back off. I'm going to put the ground glass one back on. Lock it in place. Now, what might happen is when you're shooting this out in the field, even though you got this cute little wrap, you know, you can put your face up to, you still might have too much light hitting it. So that's where, if you come down to Myrtle Beach sometime and you see an old guy with one of these cameras on a tripod, I may have one of these black sheets over my head so that I'm blocking the light as I'm looking through the back. You know, and I'm winding my shutter. I got this thing all closed up, and I can see everything, and I take my picture. So that would be me. That would be the only crazy person down here doing this. So a little bit of history now. I will fold this back up, lock it. I'm going to tuck it all in here. This thing is in phenomenal shape for how old it is. It really is. You know, you just push in on the sides here to release it so you can lift the door up and it snaps closed. I mean, what a nice small camera. It really is. So let me just go to some of the interesting bits of information here. So the gentleman whose name is on this camera, Friedrich Deckel, he started his career in 1889 as a laboratory mechanic for the Zeiss Company in Jena. At the end of 1898, he went into business for himself with he had a mechanics workshop, and in 1903 he founded a company called Bruns and Deckel in Munich, together with an inventor named Christian Bruns. Now, Bruns developed the compound leaf shutter, which the company successfully manufactured and marketed from 1904. Now, Bruns left the company as early as 1905, but continued to develop shutters for cameras. In 1911, Carl Zeiss acquired the patents for the new Compur shutter from Christian Bruns, and because, Deckel worked for Zeiss at one time, he let Deckel produce it under license, which is why you have that FD insignia on that front plate, and then you have the word Compur underneath. Excuse me. So the Compur shutter had a newly developed gear escapement for slow speeds, and with this it became the company's most important product for decades to come, and basically everybody used Compur shutters. Now, there were a lot of mergers of small independent camera producers in 1926 that Zeiss bought them out, basically, and they had their own Zeiss Icon camera business. So he shut down most of the former shutter productions and switched to either the Deckel or Gauthier brand shutters. At the beginning of the 50s, Deckel designed the concept of light value and exposure value scales and promoted light value coupled shutters as a general standard. Now, Compur leaf shutters, they owned the market once they were introduced, and they were like in every German camera. Kodak, with lots of times on Kodak cameras, the lenses and the shutters came from Germany, and it was put on the Kodak cameras. Now, there was no competition for Compur shutters. The startup costs, the machine costs were exorbitant, and Deckel kept the price low because he had a foothold on the market, and he manufactured so many he could keep the price low, and people couldn't compete with him because that price point was so low they couldn't justify the cost to buy all the equipment needed to be able to compete with him. So he didn't really have any competition. Now, you'd find these shutters on cameras, through the 1960s. Now, when Japanese cameras came out and were marketed in the United States, their shutters were made in Japan, and they were Copal shutters. So Copal were fantastic, excellent shutters as well. So you had Copal in all the Asian market cameras. You had Compur in all the German cameras. Now, eventually, focal plane shutters replaced leaf shutters, and the leaf shutters disappeared, although even on the recently introduced Hasselblad full frame, medium format digital cameras, they went with lenses have leaf shutters in them, because the advantage of leaf shutters is that you have flash sync capabilities at any of the shutter speeds, which you don't have with focal plane shutters. That's a big advantage, but if you're comparing, the new Hasselblad lens prices versus, say, Fuji medium format lenses, the Fujis are going to be a lot cheaper because they don't have leaf shutters in them. So that's it. That's the story of this camera, and there are a lot of German cameras made by companies you've never heard of. But they bought a lot of their parts from the same places. They bought the Compur shutters from Deckel. And, but then, like I said, the big boys started to swallow up the little guys, and then there weren't as many choices out there. The Voigtlander medium format cameras, Bellows cameras, had the FD logo on that front plate. If you have one, look at it. See if you got that FD logo. So that's it. That's the end. I hope you enjoyed this journey once again. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe. Pass my channel on to your friends. And remember, enjoy life, capture some of it. Whether it's with a 1930s plate camera, or or basically that Minolta Himatic rebranded camera that I showed you earlier. And whatever you have, go out there, try it out, have some fun. And people might not want to admit it, but film is making a small comeback. So Kodak's hiring more people and making more film, although it ain't cheap. So have a good one. And have a blessed day. Take care.